Welcome to Culture Camp, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me. How are you
Thanks.
doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Let's start how we always start with who are you and what do you do? You're giving us no clues through your background, by the way. You've got a blurred background, so yeah, give us
Being
some
a bit
give
of
us
a
some colour.
mystery. Of course, yeah. So my name is Ben Redhead. So I'm a collaboration consultant, project manager, and facilitator. So I work using deliberative approaches, which are commonly found within deliberative democracy, but adapting those to organizational settings. So first and foremost, how to better engage the public within service design, but also anything that might impact them as a stakeholder at the early stage. But
Mhm.
additionally, adapting these processes to working internally within an organization. So the core of that is based on, and I suppose the innovation that I would like to bring forward and try to bring into my process is the use of sortition. So random selection, representative random selection, in order to get a broad diversity of people being able to contribute to the discussions at the early stage, which allows to inform strategy and management and make all of that process a little bit easier as we go along.
Yeah, so your kind of interest and focus is on the processes that we use to create the cultures that grow and develop innovation.
Yes, precisely that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So tell us about some of those processes then. How do you actually do it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I'll touch on is sortition, and it is one of those words where it might seem a little bit alien at first, but effectively sortition is representative random selection. So the way
Okay.
that that process would work, so using an example of so commonly used in a citizen assembly or citizen jury, so using an example of a UK-wide climate assembly. I think it
Mhm.
offers a good example. So, firstly, it will be about establishing how many participants there will be taking part in it. So, in this case, we'd have 100 participants
Mhm.
across the UK. So, the first step of that selection would be sending out an invitation across the country to different area codes. So for every one invitation, it'll be up to 200 invites would be sent to people's door.
Okay.
That random invitation will be an opportunity for people to put forward their interests first and
Mhm.
foremost, um, putting their demographic information, key things, age, gender, ethnicity, geographical location, and that's something that can also be adapted to um, the question that we're looking for. So, for
Yeah.
example, if it's climate based, that their respondents might be how they feel to do with climate. Once they put that forward, um, the second stage of stratification is what we'll call it, using the random selection algorithm, um, which at the Sortition Foundation they have built and is
Okay.
self-proclaimed as being the fairest selection algorithm of all.
Okay.
So like a Cinderella story.
Sounds like a fairy tale.
Yeah, absolutely. So once that second round of process is stratified and making sure that demographically representative of different views, those
Mhm.
people will then participate in a deliberative assembly and be able to put recommendations forward. Now, that's of course something that's national and something that's focusing on governments and is
Mhm.
intertwined within governance. Adapting this process to organizations, one of the attractions of using this kind of thing internally is the fact that that initial process of sending out invitations and requiring people to reply and register interest, which inevitably the percentages may be quite low within
Mhm.
organizations, you have much more of a captive audience
Sure.
initially. So firstly, the cost aspect of having to send, little envelopes and making it look very grand and all of that kind of stuff. You can
Mm.
put that to one side. I mean, fair enough. You can maybe even get hours, or you can do it as fancy as you like. But
Yeah.
generally, you have a captive audience within an organization. And additionally, particularly if you're working with someone which has a good database of the people that are working with. So essentially, using these algorithms and processes, it's very straightforward to do it
Mm.
within an organization, and you can make sure that the people that are represented not only are demographically represented, but also represented of the types of organizational differences and boundaries that they may be in tow. So that's really how sortition is generally
Mhm.
used for citizens' assemblies, but also kind of how it then can be adapted within
Yeah.
organizational settings. And effectively, any outreach to the public would likely require that first iteration of the approach,
Yeah.
as best as possible, getting a captive audience and then stratifying, which in
So
this case is
casting that
obviously
net wide and then kind of pulling that net in based on the demographics, the needs of the project, those kind of things.
absolutely, yeah. There's an interesting aspect of it again, touching more on the organizational setting, is
Mm.
the ability to kind of break down silos,
Sure.
um, being able to kind of the way that you design your process, you can
Mhm.
ensure that there is representation from across
Yeah.
departments, across functions within an organization, as well as hierarchy as well. There's of course a
Mm.
little bit of it's like a chef. There is a recipe to ensure that there is that balance. You don't want no hierarchy in there at all,
Yeah.
particularly if you're working within organizations where um, it is inevitably set up and any decisions have to move forward. What you want to do is just capture a balance between representing the voice of the organization, but also being able to kind of draw on a variety and a diversity of contributions that can
Yeah.
make the discussion rich, which can ultimately improve the insights and the outcomes effectively.
Yeah. I had a really good example of kind of the usefulness of that balance of people in the room.
Mm,
Just yesterday, I was running a board away day, and
yeah.
it was so it was the board members, but it was also the staff team.
Hmm.
Had an incoming chair,
Yeah.
so he knew the organisation well, had worked with the organisation well, but through the day, with the activities that we did and the sort of shared problem solving kind of activities that we did with staff teams and board members, at the end he was reflecting that actually he didn't realise how big a part of the role it would be to ensure that the board and himself have that connection with the perspectives of the staff, um,
Mm,
and also the weight of responsibility on the people who are in both spaces. Um,
absolutely.
so some good reflections from that. But I wonder if there's other kind of benefits and draws for, and if we focus on the kind of organizational
Yeah, for
approach,
sure.
why, I mean, their boss might tell them to do it, but why else might people want to get involved? What's the carrot?
Yeah, I think so. From a kind of a leadership perspective, I think one of the keys to it in any change management process, um, I was having a conversation with someone who, in more of the management consultancy lens, right, whose
Sure.
job is to put forward um, processes, and they're amazing world leaders, get paid hundreds of thousands, silly money, in order to have these set processes. But
Yeah.
what they're starting to work out is that any change management process, you can take it 80% of the way there. I mean, I would disagree with these ratio percentages, but
Sure.
the point still stands. You can take it 80 way of the percent there, but if you don't get the human side of things right, it
Yeah.
completely disappears. So by flipping that and prioritizing the human element and the voices at
Mhm.
the earliest stage, effectively any change management process will be a lot easier. I mean, you could use the word
Mm.
efficient,
Yeah, yeah,
but effectively it's easier. It's easier to manage because you're including the voice of the people that these ideas are for. essentially
Yeah.
the people that you're expecting them to carry out. So a lot of organizations, that's why marketing budgets for their own internal strategies are so high. It's the strange
Mm,
thing, right? It's
yeah.
why all of these, you know, management systems have to be in place, right? And that in itself creates a bit of a churn. So it does require some bravery. It does require
Hmm.
some trust, but only really at the early stage, because otherwise your job, you can put together the most fantastic strategy, but if that strategy is come up, within the board level, the management level,
Yeah.
your job is not actually about delivery. Your job is about convincing. Your job
Hmm.
is about convincing people that this is the right way to go. And
Yeah.
trust me, guys. Whereas even if it does look good on paper and is very practical, there is going to be an element of you're all right. you know,
Yeah. And that's a
that's a
huge
lot.
risk, isn't it,
Yeah,
for
exactly. And all of the kind of
organizations?
being a little bit miffed generally of
Yeah.
abuse and stuff like that, that's going to accelerate. That's going to open up even wider as well. So I think really for me, from an organizational perspective, it's absolutely fundamental
Yeah.
to how to include the human element within any change management process.
Yeah. And I suppose that also includes the facilitation of the process. So
Yes.
you've cast the net wide, you've got the right people in the room. How do we facilitate that kind of space so that we're drawing on the human side of things, but also getting the work done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to be conscious of at the beginning is, you're creating these spaces which are anormal. So depending on the organization and culture, in this instance, if you are expanding it out to those that aren't used to being involved in these settings, I think from a
Sure.
facilitator's point of view, even prior to the workshop itself, it's about setting that safe space and
Hmm.
working within the leadership or with the leadership to actually determine quite clearly. So this is how I potentially would see it. How would you see it? And
Hmm.
actually kind of predefining the limitations of it, and then giving someone in a leadership role, someone that might not even actually be involved within the workshop themselves, but setting that out and really clarifying that to the
Mm.
involvements, effectively saying, your voice is important. This is not a
Sure.
tokenistic
Yeah.
exercise, because otherwise there's a tendency for people to revert to type.
Hmm.
So taking that opportunity prior to the session to really, it might even be one-to-ones, it might be, as I said, the framing from the leadership, and then really kind of being conscious of that as the process develops, of those
Hmm.
kind of power dynamics that may exist, and the way that you would have these conversations. It's minimizing, kind of speaker 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 participants,
Mm.
minimizing those kind of dynamics as best as possible. Roundtable conversations, even if you might have an expert contribution. So, for example,
Sure.
someone from the finance team has some really useful information for this purpose. It's not
Hmm.
a speaker audience question answer,
Sure.
because inevitably the people that are going to be raising their hands are going to be those, you look to your right, what is my manager
Hmm.
doing? And you're
Yeah.
very conscious of those kind of organizational hierarchies. So it's best as like creating carousels,
Mm.
really creating that safe space. So I think that's the fundamental aspect to begin with, to facilitate that
Hmm.
shift. In terms of the actual workshops itself, so you know that deliberative approach, giving space for questioning, space for um, proposals, and being able to contribute that. That's the key aspect of it, and as best as possible, trying to bring in the wider organizational voice. So there's a lot of good
Hmm.
DemTech tools. So DemTech, the
Hmm.
democracy technology tools, effectively, that you can use to,
Yeah.
although people might not be in the room, but to capture the voice of the wider organization, and
Sure.
kind of, so again, it's about not isolating this group and
Hmm.
actually connecting it to the wider setting. So
Yeah.
that would certainly be another thing. And then in terms of the actual facilitation design, we talked prior to the recording, you know,
Mm.
design thinking approaches, um, systems thinking approaches, you know,
Yeah.
how we can coordinate into that.
Hmm.
And then just on that point as well, I mean, a lot of what my kind of work is and thinking around at the moment is about how traditionally, you know, democracy in this instance, deliberative democracy, and then organizational innovations, you know, they're often seen as two separate things,
Hmm.
but it's about actually recognizing their similarities, and particularly within organizational settings where you are naturally more open to innovation because there's
Hmm.
outcomes that you want to achieve. You're not just doing it to reach out to the public and, you know, to
Yeah.
act like, hey, we really listen to you. You're doing it because the outcomes want to be better. And, you know,
Hmm.
innovations such as design thinking, how that's become embedded, uh,
Hmm.
you know, from initially product design into service
Yeah.
design, you know, agile approaches, you know,
Hmm.
the way that organizations are like horizontally governed, you know, and we're seeing a real proliferation of these types of approaches um, just because they're proof of their work. You know,
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
want to be empowered, people want to be involved. Um, and this, you know, adapting deliberative democracy is another aspect of that. You know,
Yeah.
it's not about kind of creating a separation that this is some, you know, brand spanking incredible innovation. It's
Mm.
just building on this idea of putting human centered. It's just a way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really does align on the facilitation approach with all of these ways that you can design thinking, you know,
Yeah.
like systems thinking and things that I touched before, as opposed to being a completely separate innovation as
Hmm.
well. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think when we hear that word innovation, we can often go to the kind of tech innovation or
Mm.
product innovation. Um, and a lot of the work that we do is around community development, around creating spaces for social value building between businesses and communities, and co-production between public services and residents or people or citizens. Um, and I think it's those general principles of that human-centered. What we're
Mm.
creating is something that's an innovation for the individual often, and sometimes
Absolutely.
that might mean a way of being um, rather than a kind of tangible outcome. But maybe just to illustrate, I wonder if you've got an example or two to share that kind of really illustrates that outcome and that innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from an organizational setting, so one project that I delivered recently, so within the wellbeing services at the university.
Hmm.
So, the university is a bit of a unique aspect of it because it's the student, it's the professional services, academic services,
Sure.
and it's something that's very kind of siloed.
Yeah.
Um, but that traditional idea of service user groups is
Hmm.
how you can kind of flip that kind of narrative, you know, and focus more on, you know, student wellbeing panels. So that would be the first kind of aspect of that. And then when you're putting forward the selection, is ensuring that using the selection approach, being able to engage students, but you know, from the diversity that you want to include. So that's one aspect of it, and then
Hmm.
getting those students in the room and helping co-design those kind of aspects is something that has been really beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's one instance.
And are there other things that you think have been developed in the world or new things that have happened because of that process with those kind of student populations?
Yeah, I think so LSE is an interesting example because within the student union as well, they've um, doing a lot more like democratic. So within the student union is actually using these democratic approaches to extend the
Okay.
voice. And I think it's just that whole idea of having different voices in the room
Mm, mm,
where, you know, if you're it might seem like a subtle difference, but any sort of service user, any sort of democratic approach where you're relying on people to put up their hands and say, yeah, I'd love to do
Yeah.
that, that's naturally going to stick within a certain population of people that are just such way inclined, which
Mm.
taking that to a political level are the people that are more likely to be the politicians, right? If we're taking
Oh.
that to an organizational level, they're the people that have, just the
Yeah, that
professional
feels some kind
climbers.
of agency and
Yeah, exactly.
within
And
the role.
it's
Yeah.
great, fair play. People have their own
Hmm.
way of doing things, but the key to it really is about actually diverse. So rather than all management conversations, all political conversations being held within a certain personality type, in essence,
Hmm.
it's being able to kind of open space for people that wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable. So within the student union, within the LSE perspective, it's about rather than like a pressure group or someone that feels really strongly about an issue being controlling the
Hmm.
narrative, there's much more of a reasonable and a reasoned debate
Yeah.
that can be had. And also the people that do participate, this is something that's, if I'm honest, is not being explored in much detail, and something that I'm hoping to develop myself, working with communities that face challenge,
Mm.
face hardship, etc., is the empowerment piece related to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of literature about, the link between co-production and empowerment, the link between design thinking empowerment with
Mm.
deliberative democracy. But on this specific aspect, I really think that there's an opportunity to kind of build on that empowerment. You know,
Yeah.
that
I think
that
that's where the systems thinking approaches can come in
yes,
really useful,
absolutely.
because if you start from that place of values and beliefs and morals and ethics, and
Yeah.
then build the structure around that, you can
Hmm.
often, if you start by thinking about what we want to do, you end up designing some kind of hierarchy that's based on the ones that you know already or that you see
Yeah,
around
for sure.
you. Whereas
Yeah.
if you build things from the kind of values and patterns of behavior and look at those things,
Hmm.
um, you can often get quite a different outcome.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely, definitely. And it's like the more opportunities you create, it's being like uncomfortable with that uncertainty, which,
Yeah,
that's certainly when we link back to that original point about like brave leadership and,
yeah, and safe spaces and
safe spaces,
trust.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
That, I mean, there's an element of actually creating the structures to therefore have that knock-on effect to
Yeah.
leverage it essentially. Um, but yeah, that's that key aspect. Creating those processes and these systems to someone that does feel empowered. And you know what, my
Mhm.
voice is going to be like heard within
Yeah,
an organ that's transformative.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it just amplifies the opportunities. I
yeah.
think that's the key aspect.
Yes, and I love all this stuff, Ben. I could talk for ages about it, and I'm sure there's people watching, listening who are also intrigued about your work. So, where's the best place to find out about you, to find out some of this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a recently prolific LinkedIn poster, so you can find me on LinkedIn.
I think that
Ben
is
Red,
where we found you. So,
there we
yeah.
go. Ben Redhead. I don't think there's too many other Ben Redheads, but if
Uh-huh.
there are, collaboration consultant facilitator would
Yeah.
be my underlying tagline. So I'm in the process of setting up a website. So
Hmm.
this approach be branded under my own practice of the name
Yeah.
Sorted. I don't know, maybe you
Nice.
can see
Hmm.
the
Yeah. See
connection
the
there.
link? Yeah.
But that's in the process of development. So watch this space.
Yeah, well, stay in touch, Ben, because it's really interesting work, and I'd love to chat more another time about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. All
Appreciate
right,
it.
take care.